Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And have an interesting article here on, these European countries, which is not just them, but later on in the article, will let you know that this is a few other governments are basically, doing this, which is here you have the Denmark's energy minister begging citizens, right? Please, 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 to stop driving as global energy shock spreads. And what we're seeing is unprecedented levels, right? In recent years, and especially now more so than ever in recent weeks, in recent days, recent months, right? We've been seeing a lot more unprecedented events, right, and effects taking place on the earth, right? And we've been warning you about this time that would come because, for a long time, the signs had been there, right? That things were all leading up to this point where we are, and it's not going to stop here, right? Remember, pursuing to Matthew the 24th chapter and Second Esdras, I forget the exact chapter, it might be the 16th chapter, but these times are described as the beginning of sorrows. So it is a time period that we're in that is escalating into a time of great trouble, all right, and distress for the world, which is a form of judgment from the Heavenly Father. So it says Iran launched another round of overnight strikes on tankers and Gulf energy infrastructure, sending Brent crude back above $101 per BBL, which that's not Brazilian butt lift. That's just a short or acronym for a barrel. Okay, a barrel of oil or crude oil here, Brent crude, whatever you want to call it. So just think of it as $100 per barrel, and sparking fears that chaos in the Middle East has triggered what the IEA, which stands for International Energy, I believe, Agency, warned could be the largest ever supply chain disruption in the history of the global oil market. All right, and that's why I mentioned what I mentioned before. This is just another example of these, these times that, when you start seeing language like ever, in the history of, that you are now in the time where history is in the making. And I don't mean just any old regular time. I mean a time that's going to be remembered for times to come. Okay, real quick, this is Jeremiah 30, verse 7. It says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. Okay, that's that making history, right? Headlines that are unmatched, headlines that are fearful because people haven't seen anything like that before. It is, and that day is a time period, right? It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. See, so when we see these things happening and we see things getting to the point where they haven't been like before, and it's only going to escalate, right? It's gonna whether it's a rapid succession of escalation or escalatory events, or they're more sparse, right? One here, then a bit of time, then another here. It's still only going to escalate more and more and more. Okay, until it's there's no doubt in the minds of anybody that this is indeed a time like never before. And that what adds to that is the uncertainty in the minds of people not knowing how to handle or navigate these uncharted waters of chaos. Okay, but it says he shall be saved out of it. So we're not concerned, or maybe a better use or a better word here would be worried. We're not worried when these things start happening because we know that the Lord told us, all right, the things that would happen and the difficulties that would come, but he also said that he would deliver us from it. That's in Second Esdras the 16th chapter from the 70th verse on down. Quote unquote, the war in the Middle East is creating the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, the IEA said on Wednesday. And Iran has come out and said, look, we're not budging. We got control over this strait. You just try it. Come on in here and try to escort ships that are in the interest of the U.S. and Israel, and see what happens to them. With the record release of SPRs by, I believe those are like strategic reserves. Because you have it's like when you have money saved up for a rainy day, right? And then you start to use it. Those savings is eventually, like, it's finite. That's why it's stored up for a rainy day. But if the rain starts lasting longer than 24 hours, you might have a problem. Okay? So it says, with the record release of SPRs by IEA members announced on Wednesday, failing to halt Brent, which is oil, that crude oil, you often see it as Brent or Brent crude or so on, from re-entering triple-digit territory. So now it's back up, I believe, we just read it, right? $101 a barrel. So it's a problem here where usually the announcement of releasing these SPRs would calm prices, right? It would calm people's minds, but it's not. And I believe I might have read this in an article yesterday where I forgot who exactly was saying it, but they were saying that at this point, it doesn't matter what governmental or policy changes they try to put in place. It will not reverse the damage that's being done so long as the Strait of Hormuz continues to remain closed or troubled, as we're seeing it now. Okay, so it says Denmark's energy minister issued a dire warning to citizens across the Scandinavian country, urging them to immediately conserve fuel and electricity. What the Danes should please do is, if there is any energy consumption that you can do without, if it is not strictly necessary to drive the car, then don't do it. What he's getting at is things that are, when he says strictly necessary, if you don't have to go out and drive the car, then don't. If you want to go out to the movies, that's not strictly necessary. That's basically what he's saying. You want to go to the gym, that's not strictly necessary. You got to go to the hospital, okay. You have to go to the store to buy some emergency supplies or whatever, okay. But just to drive around for fun, oh, no. Because why is he saying that? When you drive, you use gas, right? So if the gas supply is limited, then, this is the beginning of a series of escalatory measures that they would take, right? First is to, tell the people, hey, please limit your energy consumption, right? Don't leave the water on. Don't leave the heater on if you're not using it, those kind of things. But if countries were to rely on the cooperation of people in matters like this, where, they can do whatever they want, so to speak, that a lot of countries would be in a lot of trouble. So kind of like years ago when they introduced the jump shot, right, for the demic, they said, hey, they started with trying to coerce people with, benefits. Say, if you go and take your shot, you'll get this, you'll get that, you'll get this. Trying to have the first round be willingly through a bit of enticement. But then eventually, what did they resort to? Mandates. So what happens is when countries start running low, very low, dangerously low, and there's no real hope in sight, they're going to start closing down, like, for example, buses, public transportation, things that use these kinds of energy, they're going to shut it down. They're going to introduce rolling blackouts. Right? They're going to do these things and whatever measures they can to conserve as much energy as they can. But it's now imagine life is now at the point where your governments have to take these drastic measures to conserve the energy in the country. What by like that's if that's your it gets to the point where people's concern, their day to day is not how many views and likes am I getting on Instagram or on this or on that. No. Their life is survival, right? Like how can I like what can I do like to get through the next day? Like those kinds of that's your thought, that's your day to day now. At that point you don't even want to look at the markets. Anyway, it says here Lars Agard, Denmark's minister for climate, energy, and utilities, told local broadcaster DR in an interview earlier today. And if it continues to, situations continue to go on and they don't get any better, you'll see that governments are going to step in on this level and start actually strictly enforcing this. It says here, Agard said, energy shock has driven the country to rely on its oil reserves. That's a problem. Okay. Yes, oil reserves are there for that, but when that's what you rely on, it's when if you have to tap into your savings for a rainy day, you're making sure to do your best that whatever stream of income you had before, you can get that back up and flowing. Because now you're running on borrowed time. And the faster you use up those savings, the worse of a situation you'll find yourself in. Because the demand stays, right? Like you still got to pay rent, you still got to pay for this, you still got to pay for that, but you're using a limited supply. So what he's trying to do at least is lower demand of energy by first, speaking to the people and, sort of giving out that message like, hey, limit your use of it. But that's not really going to do much now, is it? So it says here, amid towering oil prices with no end to the conflict in sight, this creates desperation. Desperation forces people to do things they normally wouldn't do or agree to things they normally wouldn't agree to. Okay? That's what it's like putting somebody in a chokehold, right? Or in a submission hold and forcing them to tap out. Even if they don't, that's the thing. You'll see certain people where if if they're caught in a certain hold, they might try to hold out as best they can, but eventually what happens is they tap out. Right? They tap out or they pass out. Because you get to a point where there's nothing else you can do. Okay? And that's the point. When you we've been saying this for years, right? When you go back and read that letter that was discussing the three world wars and basically establishing the new world order through three world wars between Albert Pike, right, and Giuseppe Mazzini in there, which was fragments of the entire actual thing, but it was just fragments that we got. They mentioned that this war and all these things was to lead to the physical, spiritual, and emotional, economic exhaustion, okay, of the nations of the world to the point where they're now so beaten down and drained that it's like there's nothing left that they can do. That's what they want. They want to put you at the point of desperation. And when you're desperate enough, look, somebody that's desperate enough, they'll drink mud water, right? They'll drink dirty water because at least it's something, right? So it says here, we detailed and that's what they're doing. They're orchestrating this. And that's why, yesterday you had Trump come out and talk about, the U.S. has won the Iran war. And then he'll turn around and say, well, he's still enthusiastic about continuing the war for another three to 4 weeks. You said 3 to 4 weeks when it started, 13 days ago, which is close to 2 weeks ago. And now it's another 3 to 4 weeks. Listen, you never trust their timelines. And if you want proof, go back and listen to the flatten the curve rhetoric they were talking about 6 years ago during the demic. And they said in 2 weeks, we got to lock things down for 2 weeks and it'll flatten the curve. Yeah. 2 years later. Okay. 2 weeks turned into 2 years real quick. So they give the timelines and reports and so on. They give, look, it's all for damage controls to avoid panic and so on. They literally do, like, you've seen them lie and deceive on a world scale. That's how we ended up here in this war with Iran. Okay? And if they're willing to do that on a geopolitical level, knowing that that could lead to this very situation we're in, do you think that they're going to be truthful and honest with their citizens? That they're going to tell you the 100% truth. If they were willing to risk their public image, their international image, the international so-called peace of the world through lying and deception, you think that they're going to be transparent with their citizens about timelines and potential threats and so on? Bruh. We detailed the overnight chaos across the Gulf region in our geopolitical wrap titled Sixth Ship Struck. Oil tops $100, and Iran said they're willing to take it up to 200. It says here, as tanker attacks escalate hours after Trump's "we won." Yeah. Firstly, it can be felt in the private wallet. This is, back quoting a guard here, the energy minister of Denmark. It says here, first it can be felt in the wallet. And I suppose this is his bait for why you should reduce energy consumption. And here it says, and it can help stretch our reserves so they last longer. So these nations are getting desperate. And you know what? Guess what? Those that are in the higher position, the so-called princes and rulers in these nations, right? They're politicians, they're government, agents and presidents and prime ministers. They already know the deal. But eventually, the sentiment of the people will start to align with hating the whore, which is Babylon the Great, which is America. Because people are going to start to feel this pain, all right, of what we're speaking about here, of this energy prices rising and how it actually affects them. They're going to find that out through experience. And a lot of people are not going to like that. They're not going to like having limited energy, limited resources. It's going to be a time that people are not going to enjoy at all. And it's going to have side effects. Remember, everything has side effects, whether it's overt or covert. When you have a society that's grinding to a halt, it always, like, whenever you have disruptions, it leads and opens the door for chaos. And through chaos, you have theft, murder, rape, assault, all of these things. They are side effects lurking and waiting for the opportunity. The slightest breach of peace will bring in these perilous side effects rushing in like a flood. So when these different countries, the European countries and so on, and they start feeling that, and their people, the citizens, start feeling that, you'll have national sentiment against the cause. Because now they're going to say, well, what is the cause of all this? I wonder, maybe if the U.S. hadn't bombed Iran with Israel, maybe this wouldn't be the case. And you might have some that'll say, oh, well, it's Iran's fault because they're keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. But then eventually they're going to say, well, okay, why are they doing that? Because other ships are able to pass through. If it's not in the interest or the benefit of the U.S. and Israel, and Iran has given stipulations for, what they will be willing to consider. So eventually people are going to start saying, well, then just give them what they want so we don't have to keep suffering anymore. So they might say, well, it's Iran's fault. But then they might say eventually, give them what they want so they can stop. Because blaming them isn't doing anything. And then they're going to say, no, we're not going to give them what they want. And that's going to shift the rage from it's Iran's fault to you mother effers. So you're deliberately doing this, knowing how to stop it, and you don't want to stop. Oh, my gosh. And it's, once again, this is just an example scenario that I'm giving, right? But you got to see, this is how people think. This is how one event leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another. And eventually you have this conglomerate of sorrows, right? How should I mention that? Okay, so it's all linked, but it all boils down to prophecy. Whether you believe it or whether you don't, you're going to experience it. And I believe that's well, actually, one more. It says here, energy conservation warnings have also emerged in the UK, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And these aren't going to be the only places, as governments and industry groups try to curb fuel demand and protect domestic reserves to weather the energy crisis. And then you have a big problem on your hands when you run out of reserves and the crisis is not over. Boy. So that's pretty much it. Lord willing, that was edifying and informative to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Kodesh. And until next time, Shalom.